Let the scriptures speak for themselves.
So the last question I wanted us to talk about, and if there's anything else, I'd love to hear if you've got some other things that would be worth talking through. But whether you would consider Revelation apocalyptic literature or not, how you would see it, or at least I'm sure you'd probably see at least chapters 4 through 20 as a vision, and help us as Westerners understand Scripture in context. For example, with my Daniel videos that I did, chapter 7 through 12, a lot of people were really confused because I wasn't diving into allegory or symbolism. All I'm doing is saying, here's this crazy kooky vision, but hey, pay attention because Gabriel shows up in just the next section of the chapter and he explains all this stuff in very literal message and meaning. So people get fixated on the visions and they're like running all over to, a different universe with these interpretations. Yeah. And then they disregard the angel Gabriel's literal interpretation of the crazy vision. And they're like, how did you land there? Like you're a heretic. And I'm like, no, just pay attention to the angel. He interprets this for you.
Passage.
Yeah. Just keep reading. Yeah. So
That's
help
right.
us with Revelation. Do you think people should see this as a certain type of genre that maybe overlaps with the visions of Daniel? Or should we take all this wooden and literal? Should we look for a red horse galloping on the street in 21st century America? What should we do with these sections? And then I'd also, along with the type of literature that Revelation is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the context. All right, I said a joke earlier that many people read Revelation like it was written to the churches in North America of the 21st century, but that's not how it reads. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on context, right? Audience and type of literature.
Well, let's talk about that first. I think the context of Revelation, to me is so well set up for us, really, in the beginning.
4 chapters of context.
The book. Man, yeah, it's like if you didn't know, this was written to you. This was given to you, John, so you could take it to the churches because they need it. But in the futurist eschatology. And I'm guilty of believing this at one time too, but there's the whole idea, there's many ideas, but one of them is that the churches are allegorical representations of the chapters of the history of the Christian church to our modern age, and it's like, so I don't know which church we are. We're one of them, maybe the last one. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that to me, I've heard that teaching. Even when I heard it, I was like, are you sure that's what this is about? But yeah, the context is truly. And okay, so here's one thing that must be understood or at least discussed, and that is the dating of the book.
That's important.
Because the traditional dating of the book is around 90, 92 AD in the reign of Domitian.
Yeah.
Caesar Domitian.
Yeah,
and
let's park the car here for a second because I've actually been rigorously studying that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I was going to
whether the listeners care or not, I'd like to hear.
Well, it's important because at 90, in the year 90 or 92, if the vision was given around that time frame, then we have to ask ourselves, how does that help the churches? What was going on in 90 or 92 or in that time frame that was affecting the churches in Asia? Yeah. And it really wasn't much.
Yeah.
Because the Romans had defeated the Jews, put down all the zealots. The Neronic persecution had ended. From the history books, we don't get much in the way of persecution during that time period. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what was the book given to them for if it was given in that time period? And so when you study into the why it's dated in 90 or 92, it's because of one singular thing, and that is a quote in Tertullian's writings, right? That says...
Or Irenaeus.
Is it Irenaeus? I may have it wrong.
That's okay. No, I think it's Irenaeus, yeah. But yeah.
But that quote says that, and it's very general in the Greek, It's not even very specific. It says
Yeah.
something about the vision of John in one sentence,
Yeah.
and then it uses a very indiscriminate pronoun to say either it or him or something
Or that. Yeah. Yeah.
was then seen in during the reign of Domitian,
Yeah.
about 92 AD.
That's right.
Well, is it talking about that John saw the vision, or did they see John, or did they see the writing? Did they see the book or his letter? Nobody knows, but they use that as the proof for why they date the book to 92 AD.
I think thousands of people, when we get to heaven, will surround Irenaeus, whoever it was. I think it was Irenaeus, and grill him for confusing the whole church for 2,000 years, because no one understood what he meant in that sentence for us to date and interpret the book of Revelation. But that's where everyone runs. And sadly, all the fathers following that quote just quote it verbatim. They don't change it. They don't speak into it. They just quote it verbatim. And so all we have is that misconstrued, confusing phrase repeated throughout church history. And so I watched a debate, 3-part. It was like a 3-hour debate with Hank Hanegraaff and somebody from a dispensational group, I think at Dallas Theological Seminary. And the guy listed like 10 early church fathers as all supporting this view. And I'm like, that's kind of a stretch, because they all just quote exactly what he said, and they don't engage with his view at all. They just write it down and repeat it,
Yeah.
So anyways, but
well, then when you really examine this thing and you get into it, you find a few things that give you pause, right? And one is the tone and exactly what we already talked about, the churches. Like, when would they have needed this? When were they under persecution? Well, it was before the temple was destroyed. It was in around 65 AD, 60 to 65. And people also say, because that quote includes something about the Isle of Patmos, I think it says, well, I'm not going to quote it. I don't have it in front of me.
In the beginning, John speaks of being exiled to Patmos, and then, I think you're going like most people speak of Domitian exiling somebody. Yeah,
that's right. But the thing is, he doesn't say he was exiled there. And I found other writings that say that he went there to preach to those at the Isle. So there's a high possibility there were other times he was on that island, doing a circuit, just like Paul did on his missionary journeys. He went around all the different places teaching, and I think that John literally was doing the same types of things, and that one of those times he saw this vision. It doesn't say that in Revelation. It doesn't say he was exiled. It just says he was on the island. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then the other thing is the internal evidence of the book. There's no mention of the destruction of the temple, the most significant event in the history of the Jewish nation. In fact, there's a passage in Revelation that talks about the angel talking to him saying, go measure the temple and see what the measurements are thereof. Well, if there was no temple on earth at that time, what was he talking about?
And why measure the temple that God has destroyed to speak judgment over the temple, right?
So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, it seems like a lot of evidence that there's a likelihood of a date, and I think it's around 60 to 65 AD that it was written, because that was probably when the churches would have needed it the most, right before the worst persecution started. So to me, that is the context truly of the book. And so the Christians, again, like in the other passage, they were worried, they were scared, there was a lot going on, a lot of wars being fought, soldiers everywhere. And so if you are in the middle of the most significant spiritual eschatological event in history, but you're physical, you're human, you're not seeing all the spiritual things going on, what might you need to hear to know that it's going to be okay, that God has it all under control? Well, he goes into heaven and he sees a huge vision of what's going to be happening from a spiritual perspective. And it's very spiritual. There's a lot of spiritual things that happen, but it gives them the context for understanding that what they are part of is a bigger picture. And there's a lot going on they can't see, and to just hold on tight because he will resolve it. And this is how, right? And so I think that is truly the context of the book. that is given to these churches and why it helps them, because they're like, why there's earthquakes. I mean, there was like, I counted in reading the historians, there were like 12 different times where there were earthquakes that were some big enough to destroy cities.
And what does Jesus say in the Olivet Discourse? When you see those, the end is not yet.
Yep, that's right.
And there were famines. Right. Yeah.
It was a scary time. And so to me, that's how I see it. As if I had received this in the first century, it would have given me some hope. It'd have been like, there's things going on we don't see, so we've got to hang on tight. We've got to hold the line. We've got to stay strong in our beliefs and our boldness for Christ, because in the end, there will be a reward for us for that, as he said, right? Yeah. And so to me, that would have given me all the context I needed. And so that truly is what makes sense for me when I come to the book of Revelation.
Yeah. No, I think that's helpful. The other two things that stand out to me, I'd love to share my thoughts and maybe hear if you have any things. Yeah. The long list of timestamps we find in Revelation, very soon, very soon, very soon. It is at hand. It is about to happen. Yeah. Almost need to be cut out of the scriptures. If this is 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, how far removed is this,
Yeah.
And people always run to the passage in Peter that one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like one day. And that's true in its context. But what God is seemingly trying to do here is to give people an idea that something's around the corner. And again, I think if we look at all this together in context, we have the prophecies of Daniel. So if they know Daniel, they know all that's supposed to take place somewhere around their generation. Then you take everything Jesus taught them at the Olivet Discourse for the final things. The Olivet Discourse is significantly important because he reveals when you see earthquakes, when you see famines, that is not the end. Don't be alarmed. People are going to show up saying they're the Messiah. It's not me. When I show up, you're going to know, right? And then he tells them the sign that Luke, I think, records very well. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, that's when you leave. That's when you get out.
Yeah.
And he gives them all this clear prophecy to guide them in their lifetime. And then, again, we have this recording in the historians of the early church in which all the Christians left the city right before this happened. And that wasn't customary. Usually you go inside the walls. You get in the city when you get attacked. But rather, the Christians, they left all their stuff and got out of town, went to the mountains. And I think whether you believe it or not, to wholly discount it and not engage it, right, or consider the possibility that it's true, it's crazy. It's just not wise. That was the timestamps, and then the church history of the Christians of their day getting out, come out of her, just like it's recorded in Revelation, right?